Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
Without telling us the verdict, juror number 4, do you believe the jury has reached a unanimous verdict as to all verdict counts in this case?
A verdict is handed down in a double homicide trial for Colorado defendant Kevin Dean Eastman. And the parents of the accused Oxford High School shooter file an appeal, arguing their case should be thrown out. Plus, a Parkland school shooting survivor describes what happened moments after he fled from the school.
Nikolas Cruz came and sat down right next to me.
But first, the Murdaugh murder mystery.
What say you, Richard Alex Murdaugh? Are you guilty or not guilty of the felonies wherein you stand indicted?
Not guilty.
Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Brian Buckmeyer. Alex Murdaugh, the disgraced South Carolina attorney accused of murdering his wife and son, pleads not guilty to the charges. Law and Crime correspondent Anjanette Levy is here with what happened in court. Anjanette?
Brian, Alex Murdaugh appeared in court alongside his attorneys to enter those not guilty pleas to the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. Now, Murdaugh looked noticeably different. The former attorney is now a defendant, of course. He wore handcuffs, street clothes, and his head was shaved. Prosecutors in Colleton County, South Carolina, say Murdaugh used 2 guns, a rifle and a shotgun, to murder Paul and Maggie on their hunting estate in June 2021. The crime shocked the community. Alex Murdaugh comes from a prominent family and is part of a legal dynasty in South Carolina. Murdaugh answered questions during the arraignment.
Richard Alex Murdaugh, if that is your name, please raise your right hand. Do you waive reading of the indictments?
Yes, sir.
What say you, Richard Alex Murdaugh? Are you guilty or not guilty of the felonies wherein you stand indicted?
Not guilty.
How shall you be tried?
By God and my country.
Now, Alex Murdaugh and his lawyers did not object to him being held without bail on these murder charges. He already had a $7 million bond in place for another case involving fraud allegations that stem from how the estate of his late housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, was handled. Murdaugh is also facing charges in a plot to take his own life so his son Buster could collect the life insurance money. Brian.
Thanks, Anjanette. Joining us today is former SWAT detective Lisa Lockwood and co-host Terry Austin. Lisa, new murder charges against the now infamous Murdaugh. With all that he's facing, were these charges expected or a surprise to you?
They were expected. The only thing is I didn't expect it so soon. It's been a year since the deaths of Maggie and Paul, the wife and the son of Mr. Murdaugh, and all they have right now is circumstantial evidence. And because it's circumstantial, it takes a while to build the case, and it's slow and it's a methodical process. So yes, I expected it, surprised at how early they did it, but it seems that they have enough.
Yeah. Well, Terry, the defense attorney did not fight to have bail imposed or set in this case, and the judge agreed. Why do you think the defense did that?
You know, I think the defense knew it was futile to argue for a full release on his own recognizance, and you might as well make a good faith gesture and agree to impose some amount of bail here. And I think obviously for bail, there are multiple considerations. So flight risk, harm to self, harm to others, the risk that he'll commit another crime. And if you ask me here in this case, all of those exist. So there's going to be bail. The question is how much. You might as well agree to it.
Yeah. Well, Anjanette, tell us about the agreement the prosecution and defense announced at the hearing.
Well, Brian, it was pretty interesting. A lot of times you'll see in high-profile cases, attorneys on both sides will agree not to discuss the case publicly, and that was part of one of the agreements that was announced in court. No extrajudicial statements. Also, they agreed to file a lot of the motions under seal. So that agreement is in place as well. Also, the judge said, you know, obviously you can do that, but anything that's discussed in open court is fair game, which we all know. And then an interesting comment by Dick Harpootlian, one of the attorneys for Alex Murdaugh. He said that basically Murdaugh wants to put this behind him and hopes that law enforcement can find the real killers. So we've kind of heard that type of thing before. O.J. Simpson, most notably, said when he was acquitted, he wanted to help find the real killers of his wife, Nicole, his ex-wife, Nicole, and her friend, Ron Goldman.
All right, interesting arguments there. We'll see how that case develops as it continues in the Murdaugh murder mystery. And 6 of the 13 Turpin children who were rescued from a life of captivity in their parents' California home in 2018 are filing a lawsuit, alleging severe abuse after they were placed in foster care. David and Louise Turpin abused their 13 children for years until 2018 when their daughter Jordan managed to escape. She told officials her brothers and sisters, who ranged in age from 2 to 29, had been starved and sometimes chained to their beds. Authorities subsequently learned the Turpins had deprived their children of hygiene, education, sleep, healthcare, and more. The children were virtually isolated from the world, some for decades, in what the media dubbed a house of horrors. David and Louise pled guilty to more than a dozen felonies and were sentenced to life in prison. Unfortunately, that's not where the abuse ended. A new report released this month discovered the siblings received poor care after they were rescued. The lawsuit against the county and 50 unnamed defendants alleges some of the children were sexually abused and that they were placed with abusive caregivers for 3 years, who were later charged and arrested for crimes stemming from the alleged sexual and physical abuse of foster children. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the accused Oxford school shooter's parents say their case should be thrown out before it goes to trial. But first, a Parkland school shooting survivor takes the stand, where he ran into the shooter just minutes after the massacre. Welcome back. We turn now to Florida for the Parkland school shooter penalty phase trial. On Thursday, a survivor testified he ran into the gunman after the shooting, not knowing he was the culprit. 17 people were killed and 17 more injured when a then 19-year-old gunman opened fire at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. In October of last year, the shooter pled guilty to 17 counts of murder and 17 more counts of attempted murder, which prompted his case to head straight into the penalty phase. It's now up to a Broward County jury to decide whether the shooter is sentenced to life in prison or given the death penalty. On Thursday, survivor John Wilford took the stand. He described fleeing from a McDonald's restaurant after the shooting, where the shooter sat down next to him. Wilford later found out he was the school shooter who had shot and injured his sister.
He just sat down. I didn't think much of it. You know, he was just, I figured he was from school because of what he was wearing, but.
What was he wearing?
ROTC uniform.
Okay. So what happened then?
From then, I wasn't really, I mean, I saw him sit down, so I just was telling him, you know, like, this is so chaotic. You know, this is crazy. All these helicopters and SWAT cars coming, like, what do you think this could be? And I don't remember him saying much, but he was just head down, wasn't really talking to me. I don't remember much of the conversation, but I was doing most of the talking.
Okay. Did he ask you anything?
No, not until I started to leave, when my mother called me and told me that she was there.
Okay, what did he ask you?
He asked me for a ride when I was like starting to leave the McDonald's to meet my mother on the other side. That's when he started talking to me.
Okay, and what did you say?
He asked me for a ride. He was pretty insistent on it, and I said no. I wasn't really thinking much of it. I mean, I was just trying to get home. My sister wasn't answering her phone. I was nervous. I was panicked. I also had a bad gut feeling about it.
It's good that he had that bad gut feeling. Terry, as we hear from more and more witnesses, what is the image you think the jury is getting of the Parkland shooter?
Well, it's interesting because I think the image is exactly what the prosecution wants that jury to have of this defendant. He has those 7 aggravating factors, and I think he's proving it all with the witnesses that he's putting on that stand. So one of the aggravating factors is the fact that the murder was heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and absolutely it was. The fact that the shooter could come out and sit next to someone whose sister was injured or in the event. And so I definitely think that he's showing that this person really has no feelings at all whatsoever. It was cold and calculated. I think that the prosecution is showing that very well too. And it was a governmental function. That's one of the other aggravating factors. It was at a school. So I definitely think that part of what the prosecution's design here is to make sure he ticks off all of those 7 factors here. And, it was a risk of death to many. Of course, we know for a fact 17 dead, 17 injured. So I think the jury's coming away with a feeling that this person is a horrible individual, and all of those aggravating factors will probably apply.
Yeah, the prosecution definitely is methodically going through that list that you so well put out for us there, Terry. Now, Lisa, I'm assuming as a former detective, you've sat across the table from a number of suspected killers. How difficult must it have been for Wilford once he knew who he was sitting across from?
Well, in the job that I had, obviously, the element of surprise was really never there. You just always suspect the worst when you're dealing with criminals. In this particular case, he thought he was a student. He was wearing ROTC attire. He thought he was part of it. The only thing that was peculiar is that he pulled up and sat across from him and then became adamant about getting a ride. But good thing Wilford had the gut instinct. And I always say, trust it. Trust your gut when something feels off. And he did. He told him, no, I'm going to decline the ride, and that was it, and he left. So I'm sure seeing that video of himself in the aftermath probably was very, very eerie for him.
Yeah, especially with the connection with his sister. And I think the clip we showed there was his sister in the audience. We would probably expect her to testify as well. Well, in Colorado, Ring doorbell footage catches a suspect in the act after pointing a gun at a couple who he followed home. Law and Crime reporter Sierra Gillespie has the story.
It happened on July 15th, about 20 minutes west of Denver, Colorado. A couple there says they were walking home when a man and woman started following them. After that, the suspects followed the couple home, where the male suspect pointed a gun at their faces. That's when the couple ran inside and slammed the door. Investigators say minutes after the suspects sped off, they robbed another person at gunpoint.
After releasing the video, investigators say they arrested the male suspect, who they say was wearing a wig at the time. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a verdict is handed down in the trial of Colorado versus Kevin Dean Eastman. Plus, Jennifer and James Crumbley say they aren't at fault in the Oxford High School shooting. Could their case be dismissed? Welcome back. Parents of the accused Oxford High School shooter filed an appeal saying their involuntary manslaughter charges should be dropped completely. In an appeal filing this week, Jennifer and James Crumbley argue they never should have been charged in the first place. Court documents argue the Crumbley parents should not be held accountable for the choices and actions of their son, saying they had no idea he would carry out the deadly attack. In November of last year, the gunman opened fire at Oxford High School. 4 people were killed and 8 others injured. The then 15-year-old suspect was arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and terrorism. Jennifer and James Crumbley were later charged for failing to secure the weapon used in the attack. Just last month, a Michigan judge ruled the suspect's text messages and journals could be used as evidence in the parents' trial. Right now, that trial is still set for October of this year. Terry, do the Crumbley parents have an argument as to why their case should be thrown out, or is this a Hail Mary of a request?
Oh, Brian, I definitely think this is a Hail Mary of a request. What I will say is that these charges are very unique. It's very rare that we see the parents of a child getting charged in connection with that crime. But here, I think the prosecution made the right decision. They're being charged because they are culpable. The fact that they knew he had mental illness issues. They knew he had a gun. They knew he had ammunition. They completely and totally ignored what the school was trying to convey to them in terms of what they saw him doing, the drawings that they saw, the clues that he gave in terms of, wanting to kill small animals. So I definitely think that the parents should be held responsible for this. It's a unique set of circumstances. And I do think that, of course, they're going to try to have the case dismissed against them. But I think it's a Hail Mary. I don't think the judge is going to allow that to happen at all.
Yeah, I like the fact that you use the word unique, because that's kind of my question for Lisa as to how unique this is. Because, Lisa, the Crumbley parents are the only parents being charged in a mass shooting, but there are some similarities in the Highland Park shooting. Do you think in that case the shooter's father could be charged?
Well, if we're using the precedent that we're using right now in this particular case, I would say yes, it fits the criteria. They ignored help for his mental health issues. We had April of 2019, he attempted suicide with a machete. Police went there, they took away his knives and his daggers. Then let's fast forward to September of 2019, where he threatened to kill his whole family. And again, no charges were pressed. These are mental health issues. And then we have December, just 3 months later, where father goes and co-signs and sponsors him to get a FOID card. Who in their right mind is going to do that for a son who in the same year attempted to kill himself and the family? Now let's go buy him a gun. To me, that does fit the criteria for involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, and Lisa, it's not just what you said, it's what's missing as well in my mind, because if all this happens, did you get your son help in between, a social worker, psychiatrist, anything? You're just like, it's 3 months ago, let's just buy you a gun. Like, that is bewildering to me, but we'll see how the courts think of that one. Well, when we come back, a jury hands down a verdict in Colorado as Kevin Dean Eastman faces a possible sentence of life in prison for a 2020 double homicide. Welcome back to Law&Crime Daily. A Colorado man is sentenced a day after the jury found him guilty of a double homicide in the trial of Kevin Dean Eastman. Late Wednesday night, the judge announced Eastman was found guilty on all charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence for the deaths of his ex-girlfriend Heather Frank and her new love interest, local musician Stanley Scott Sessions, in February of 2020. Prosecutors say Eastman cut Sessions' throat after inviting him over to Frank's apartment using her cell phone. Eastman and Frank were charged in his murder until it was discovered Frank had also been killed. Investigators believe Eastman fatally shot Frank to silence the only witness to Sessions' killing. Prosecutors allege Eastman burned Sessions' body before Frank's body was discovered wrapped in plastic, hidden on the rural property of his new job. Investigators say he was preparing to burn her body as well before being arrested at a nearby gas station. The verdict was handed down 7 hours after the jury began their deliberations.
Dispensing with the caption as relates to count number 1, murder in the first degree involving victim Stanley Scott Sessions. The verdict reads, we the jury find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. As it relates to count number 2, murder in the first degree involving victim Heather Frank. The verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree after deliberation. The jury further found that this was an act of domestic violence. We, the jury, find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of tampering with a deceased human body. We, the jury, find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of tampering with physical evidence.
On Thursday, Eastman learned his sentence after being convicted of murder.
What I will say, Mr. Eastman, is that you are going to spend the rest of your natural life in prison based on your vicious acts of violence, jealousy, and control, and the taking of 2 precious lives, and thereafter disposing of their deceased bodies in such a disrespectful manner. That's why you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. The court is going to sentence you to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole.
All right, so Lisa, clearly the jury didn't buy that Bunnell and Frank were in on these murders. Why do you think that was?
Because simply it was a ludicrous defense. What skin in the game did he have to help bury the bodies, get rid of the bodies, and then say later on that he also killed Frank because he panicked? There's no motive for him to do this. It was a Hail Mary pass. It didn't work. They didn't buy it. I think anybody that was watching the trial thought, oh, wow, that's a really far stretch for him to blame his former coworker for the whole kit and caboodle, for killing his wife and for killing Sessions. It didn't make sense at all.
What I will say, this is a great teaching moment in terms of what's the difference between a doubt and a reasonable doubt. I don't think the jury found this to be a reasonable doubt. Anything can be a doubt, and it wasn't enough to carry the defense's case. Well, Terry, Why is the sentencing being done so soon? I mean, typically this happens weeks, sometimes months afterwards. And did the time, life without parole, fit the crime in this double homicide?
It definitely fit the crime, Brian. And in Colorado, if you are convicted of a crime of violence, that carries a mandatory prison sentence, meaning that the judge has no choice but to sentence you to prison. So the judge can increase the sentence, but he can't reduce it. But here, he was convicted of first-degree murder. In Colorado, first-degree murder is life. Life is life. So I think the judge just decided, look, I don't think I'm going to change my mind here. Nothing is going to change the decision. And he wanted to get it over. Now, obviously, there could be, victim impact statements, but the judge had already made up his mind that he was going to do life without parole. And so that's exactly what he did. He didn't think there was a reason to hold it over.
Makes sense why there was no delay in that and just kind of move right forward. Well, Lisa, Terry, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.